9, Kennett Zenith Cablevision. Thank you for watching. It's time for talk. Each evening at this time, Monday through Friday, Rosemary interviews local personalities and others who bring items of interest to this community. Time for Talk is a community betterment service designed to cooperate with our local community betterment program. Tonight's program originates in our Time for Talk studios in the Slicer Street Church. And now, it's time for talk.
You are looking at a logging train in the St. Francis swamps west of Kennett at about 1900. I hope you're able to see from the picture that it seems that the railroad bed is logs, just hewn logs. They were out cutting, and the logs on the flatbed back there are cypress and tupelo and gum and oak. A logging train here, and that's the history of our country, and we have here in this studio Dr. A.O. Goldsmith, whose father was one of the owners of the railroad, came in there and worked with it, and we're talking about, early 1900s when he was with the railroad. You actually remember working in the railroad office, not when it was a logging train, but later it was converted to a passenger line. Is that right?
Well, sure. Before I was 12 years old, I was checking cars in the freight yards, which involved, writing down the name of the railroad that the freight car was from, and the number of the car, whether it was empty or loaded, and if it was loaded, there was a label on the side of the car telling what the contents were, and I listed that.
All right, tell me, earlier, of course, when this logging train was really functioning in this area, the man who started this, as I understand it, was a W.D. Laswell. What can you tell me about him?
Well, the Laswells, including W.D., were originally from Camel. I don't know when he came down here, but it was before 1900 when he started his sawmill, and in order to get material for the sawmill, he went out into the swamps, and it took rails and locomotives to get the logs out of there, just like it did up in the Mingo swamp around about the same time.
Okay, so he'd bring the logs out, bring them to his mill. Do you know where his mill was located?
It was at the north end of Vandeventer Street. And as I recall it, at the time I remember it was a stave mill. Now, staves were what they made barrels out of. And, of course, those staves were made out of oak.
Okay, so he had the stave mill at the north end, at North Vandeventer, at the end of Vandeventer Street. Okay, from this logging operation, now say this timber's been cut over, when was it changed to it then became a passenger line, right?
Well, passenger was not the primary function of it. It was freight as well.
Okay, because what were the shape of the roads in that?
Well, there just weren't any highways. I remember when I was 8 or 10 years old, when we'd go up to Campbell to visit my grandparents. It would take us all day to drive up there. We'd pack our lunch and we'd pull into a churchyard about Holcomb and eat a lunch and then go on the rest of the way.
So Campbell was an all-day trip?
Yeah, just about, yeah.
Okay, all right.
And as far as from here to Haytire, you couldn't do it.
In a way?
Oh, you couldn't even drive over there with Campbell. There were roads, wagons could go through it, but a car couldn't.
Okay, what period of time are we talking about when there was a highway, say, to Haytire?
The early 1920s. They built a single lane concrete highway between Kennett and Haytire. And most of the year it was usable. Some of the year it wasn't. I remember when my sister was going to school at Cape, came home for Thanksgiving during flood time, and I had to go over there and meet her at Hayti with a Model T Ford. The water was completely over the highway out there where the floodway ditches are now. And they had driven stakes down each side of this concrete slab so you could tell where you were going.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Now, back to the railroad. He has cleared the logs out, so for the main part, Mr. Lasswell. Now then, you want to convert it just to a passenger and freight. Is this when your father came into the business?
Actually, he worked for the railroad first in Nimmons, which is about halfway between here and Piggott.
Mm-hmm.
And that was about 1904 or 5. He came to Kennett, into the Kennett office in 1908, about 6 months before I was born.
Okay, all right, so he came, at that point now, it was to be a passenger and freight, mainly.
Right.
The logging, the things were cleared in this
Well,
area.
they still brought logs out over the rails after they had started the service.
Oh, I see. Okay, so both things were going on at the same time. Okay, now then, at some point, and these pictures are all in the museum, these are copies of things, at some point then, it became known as the St. Louis, Kennett, and Southeastern Railroad, and the depot, describe where the depot is.
Well, the depot was on 1st Street, right about where the Bill Jones's service station.
Mm-hmm.
It's still there.
Okay, by the Robinson Lumber Company,
That's
the Bill Jones.
About 50 yards west of the Frisco tracks.
Okay, 50 yards west of the Frisco tracks.
Yeah.
Okay, now these tracks were what, narrow gauge at that point,
When
weren't
they first started, yes, because the locomotives, the logging locomotives were smaller engines.
Okay, now we're standing on 1st Street, and we're looking right now at the depot that's standing there, and you're talking about a period of time like 1914.
Yeah.
Okay, it is the transportation between Kennett and Piggott, say.
That's right.
But it could go north also. How'd the St. Louis name get in there?
Well, W.D. Lasswell had an office in St. Louis, and when he named it, I suppose he wanted it to sound bigger than it really was, so he included St. Louis in the name. Of course, there were many other railroads that did the same thing. They put names of places that they didn't go to.
Okay, all right.
About this picture here, you can barely see. There's a man standing here, Bill Halliburton. Incidentally, Clifford Halliburton provided me with these photographs.
Okay.
He lives in Kansas City. He died 3 or 4 years ago. But he gave me these pictures. And this is, the man sitting in the window there is my father.
Okay. All right. Here's his father and woman. Also, we have, let me just put this on right here. This is James and Susan Elliott Goldsmith. Okay, this is 1906. Now, he came in, you were going to tell me about his role in this when he went into the business.
Well, I don't remember what his title was. Title didn't really mean much. Part of the time he was called the General Auditor, and later he was called the Executive Vice President. Actually, he ran the whole road.
Mr. Lasswell was gone at that time.
Mr. Lasswell was the nominal president of the company.
Okay, so now they were hauling freight, and Dr. Goldsmith has drawn us a map of where the railroad lines were. Here starts in Kennett, comes up through Bark Camp and West Kennett. Now, there are a portion of those tracks still out in a field somewhere, are there not?
I think so.
We need to find that line, and if we can find them, we'd like to, we'll get a shot of that where they start. my husband says he's walked with the boys hunting, and he has seen the track right.
I've been intending to walk out that way to see.
All right, we're going to find those, but the track comes on then up through Bell City, Nimmons, Carysville, Ryan. I've never heard of Ryan. Does that still exist?
That was just a whistle stop.
A whistle stop, and then Piggott was the city on the other end. So you're talking about a way to get from Kennett to Piggott, and you sold tickets.
Well,
at times.
At times, when Jewel Schaefer, who was a pitcher on the Kennett baseball team, when they would make a road trip, I'd go down and sell tickets. When I was 12 and 13 years old.
Okay, now they carried the passengers, but I've also heard a lot of specialized things that this railroad would do. For instance, what about when people wanted to pick blackberries? What about that story?
They put a flat car in the train. Now remember, this was not a passenger train. It wasn't a string of passenger cars.
They didn't have seats and things.
Oh yeah, they had passenger cars, but it was a mixed train.
Okay.
Freight cars and then a passenger coach on the end. They'd put a flat car in there, and people would climb up on there for, I think it was a quarter apiece they charged them. They'd take their buckets and lard cans and baskets and ride out to where they found some blackberry briars. The train would stop, and some of them would get off, and others would stay on till they got to another place, and they would fill their buckets. And then when the train came back from Piggott, to stop and pick them all up and bring them back.
Okay, so for a quarter, you could go out to your favorite spot out really in the boondocks to pick blackberries and get back on as it came back. And it would just stop anywhere it stopped.
Wherever the people were, they'd stop and pick them up.
That's marvelous. Okay, now I also heard you tell a story before we went on about how it would take fans to Poplar Bluff.
In 1925, when Kennett played Poplar Bluff, well, they played them twice that year, but when they played them in Poplar Bluff, I was on the football team, and my dad wanted good representation of fans. So he arranged to run a special train from Kennett to Poplar Bluff, a football special, to take the high school football fans up there to the game.
Okay, now are we talking flat car, or are we talking about...
I know, this is coaches.
Oh, this is coaches.
Sure.
Oh, this is big time.
Yeah.
And can you remember how many? Did you have a good turnout? Did a lot of people go?
Oh, there must have been 100 or more, which was probably as many as they have at football games here now.
Well, all right, accordingly, anyway.
Yeah.
All right, so you did specialized things like hauling them to pick blackberries or hauling football fans. I think there were a lot of, people talking about the railroad and the size of it being small. Were there a lot of little names given to it?
Oh, they called it the Dinky and the Toonerville Trolley,
Toonerville Trolley, what...
well, you can probably remember it, but a lot of people never heard of it.
I don't know now. I don't go back all that far.
Oh, you didn't read the comic strips.
Yes, I've heard of Toonerville. I hate to admit it, but I know about it.
Like the one at Petticoat Junction, for instance. Remember that?
Right. But Toonerville Trolley, that was just a comic strip, was it not? So they talked about this railroad as being...
Well, actually, the main purpose of the railroad was to connect the Frisco lines here with the Cotton Belt lines in Piggott. See, which came on down from Poplar Bluff and Piggott and on down. And if anybody wanted to go to Little Rock, for instance, they would take the KNSE to Piggott and get on the Cotton Belt passenger train there to Little Rock or Texarkana or Houston, wherever they wanted to go down that way.
All right. It took a week to get to Houston, but maybe even longer.
No, it didn't take that long, no.
It didn't. All right. But this was a main junction in between Piggott and Kennett and went back through the swamps, built really for logging operations.
Of course, they had to change the rails in order to accommodate railroad cars from standard gauge tracks. The logging trains ran on narrow gauge rails. They were closer together. And they had to pull up all those rails and move them further apart to get the standard gauge so that the standard locomotives and cars could be transferred from one line to another.
You've been listening to Dr. A.O. Goldsmith as he's talked about the Iron Horse era in Kennett. There's some fascinating pictures at the museum, and they would like to have more if you have anything from this era. Thank you, Dr. Goldsmith, for coming out and being our guest.
You have been watching Time for Talk. Time for Talk is a community betterment service designed to cooperate with our local community betterment program. Each evening, Monday through Friday at this time, Rosemary interviews local personalities and others who bring items of interest to this community. If you're aware of items of interest, please let us know for possible airing on this program. Time for Talk is brought to you through the cooperation of Kennett Cablevision Incorporated and is produced in the facilities of the Slicer Street Church. The Holy Scriptures come alive. Coming up next, stay tuned.